but we still have about 4 minutes before we get started. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Good. How you doing, Katie?
Good. Ryan, meet Heidi.
Hi,
Ryan
Heidi.
will be our first artist presenting today. Heidi will be the third. And we're just waiting on Joe. Check my email, make sure we're not getting anybody telling us they're having a hard time logging in.
I've not seen anything like that yet. So at least on our
Okay.
end, so far, so good.
Yep, no, I'm looking good here. Okay. All right, so we'll just give everybody a few more minutes to get logged on, but we'll try to get started right at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just trying to close all the windows and doors to keep it a little less noisy. Where's Joe?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. We're just gonna wait one more minute for one of our artists, and then we'll get started.
Nicole, could you send Joe a note and see if everything is okay?
Sure.
If he's coming, we might be able to go ahead and get started and do Ryan. And then we can come back for Joe.
So hi, everyone, and welcome to ISC Connects with Phoenix Office of Arts and Cultures for our portfolio review series. I want to express that these sessions are being recorded for future use. So if you could mute yourself until permitted otherwise, that'd be greatly appreciated. These reviews will take place every Thursday at this time for the remainder of July. Each week, 3 juried artists will be featured in this 1-hour live portfolio review by a public art professional. Welcome to all the newcomers and welcome back to everyone who joined last week as well. For those of you who don't know who we are, the International Sculpture Center is a member-based nonprofit organization and publisher of Sculpture Magazine. We were founded in 1960 and we're actually celebrating our 60th anniversary right now. We're an inclusive community for anyone with an interest in and commitment to the field of sculpture. Today's panelist is Seattle-based artist and ISC board member, Norie Sato. And today, Norie will discuss her individual review sessions with 3 professional artists aiming to strengthen their public art portfolios. And each artist will present their unique experience held with Norie. There will be time for Q&A with each of the artists and Norie after today's presentation. Now I will hand it over to Catherine.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Katie Byaris. I'm with the Office of Arts and Culture. And I'm going to ask Mitch Menchaca, who's the director of the Office of Arts and Culture, to introduce himself and talk a little about our organization.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks, Jeanette. We're excited to be partnering with the International Sculpture Center on this portfolio review. We love when there's opportunities to mix national and local artists in professional development. The Office of Arts and Culture is the designated local arts agency for the city of Phoenix. We were established in 1985 to make Phoenix a great place to work, live, and visit. This is just one of the ways that we can help facilitate that. So without further ado, I'll turn back over to Katie to start the portfolio review.
Thanks, Mitch. So we have 3 artists with us today, Ryan Carey, Joseph Feldman, and Heidi Dauphin. We are missing Joe today. Hopefully he'll be able to log on and join us later, but we're going to go ahead and move forward. And we have Norie Sato joining with us as our reviewer for today's art review. I'm going to read a little bio on Norie. Can everyone see the presentation okay? Okay, getting thumbs up. That looks good. Let me pull up my bio here. Norie Sato is a Seattle-based artist. She creates artwork for both studio practice and for public places. She has created individual and collaborative design team public art projects, as well as creating various public art plans for both large and small cities and organizations. She works from site and context-driven ideas first, then finds the appropriate form and materials, striving to add meaning and human touch to the built environment. She is interested in how artwork is situated holistically within a site and environmental concerns of materials, concept, and use. She believes in working collaboratively on big picture thinking and to allow for a more seamless integration. She has worked in universities, airports, libraries, transit systems, city halls, convention centers, infrastructure, and parks all over the country, including Seattle, Scottsdale, Arizona, Ames, Iowa, Madison, Wisconsin, Portland, Oregon, San Francisco, Miami, San Diego. Her public art has been recognized 5 times by the Public Art Network's Year in Review. So we are really excited to have Norie with us as our reviewer today. A little bit about how this is going to go. We will start with each of the artists. They will present some slides of their work for 5 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation between Norie and the artists about how they can improve their applications for public art projects specifically. If you have questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box. We are going to track them as we go. We'll have time for a couple of questions in between each presentation, and then we'll cover the rest at the end. I think I've covered everything at this point. So let's start with Ryan. Ryan, if you want to unmute yourself and share a little bit about your background and your work.
Right. Hey, everyone. I'm Ryan Carey. So I originally from the Bay Area, moved out here about 10 years ago, and just started breaking into the local art scene. The technique I've been using is using thinned oil paint in my breath to make my work. So I find this process just kind of be meditative and make me realize the importance and how individual each breath can be. Because I definitely get in ruts where I feel like, you know, things just all feel the same. There's no uniqueness to my day or to a certain moment. But when I put my breath into certain types of paint and different colors and stuff like that, depending on my mood, it really makes me feel a little more present, a little more mindful, and realize the power that each breath has. So that's what I intend to do with my work. So this installation shot that you guys are looking at here, that wall on the left, that's kind of what I intend to do for public art. So what I do is I do the breaths on about 90-pound paper that's gessoed, since I'm using oil paint. I cut it out, and then I would paste them or use some sort of adhesive to put them on a wall and kind of come up with an organic composition. I find I kind of like that best. I've done a few things like this where I kind of plan out the composition beforehand, but it doesn't quite feel unique to this space. So I would do something where I kind of get in the space first. I have my breaths all ready to go, and then figure out how I'd like to kind of compose them for an area. So the thought behind having the breaths all together would be to just get people to be a little more mindful. So that's what I'd like to do. That's what I'd like to do in a public art atmosphere, is just see people walking by, they take a second, realize how unique and different each breath can be, and then realize that about themselves. So kind of the hope I would like to do for my public art is also set up maybe for a day or two outside the location where I'm going to be putting up my work. And then I would collect breaths from them, because it's kind of a collaborative process. All you need to do is be able to blow into the paint. I know how to mix it right, so you can do that. And then they can see their breath up on the wall and kind of see the community can all see their breaths together and what it means and how they're all different. But there's uniqueness to all of them, but there's still similarities to certain things. But you will never get the same breath again from the same person. So that's what I enjoy about the process. And that's what I'd hope to bring to a public art atmosphere. So if you want, can go next slide, please, Katie. So this is them closed up. So I title them the date and time. I put my breath on them just to give it that sense of this is a unique moment that will never happen again. So sometimes I have a intention with the breath I do. Sometimes just a little more conscious, where I'm just kind of in the moment, choosing colors I enjoy and know go well together. So this would be one where I'm kind of just in the moment, picking colors I like. And so yeah, I title it the date and time. I put my breath on it. So it's little breaths like this, about 3 inches to 5 inches, the biggest, and then just composing them all together, so you kind of get a whole feeling of how unique and different each breath is. Right? And you can just kind of flip through these as we go. See another one there. Not too much intention behind this one in terms of colors, but yeah, I just enjoy seeing the ripples of the breath in my work. It kind of, like I said, just kind of gets me to slow down a little bit, meditate on what each breath means, and shows it's unique passing by. Again, yeah, cutting these out and then place them together. So they are on paper, so it would be kind of tough to do some outside installations, which I would like to do. So I'm kind of looking for new mediums that might hold up to the outdoor component. This one here is one that I kind of remember using fear as the choice for colors, the intention of the breath, that kind of dark color with like this fire inside. That was my kind of interpretation of fear. So if I were to set up in a public atmosphere and have people do it for themselves, I'd kind of tell them they can choose an intention for the breath, or just choose colors that they are drawn to and use their breath that way. But yeah, I'd look for ways to make these a little more permanent, so I could do something outside where they kind of hold up on the elements. So maybe some kind of digital reproduction would help. And that way, maybe I could work on the scale a little bit, because since the breath is kind of a nice intimate thing, which I enjoy the intimacy of these, it would be nice maybe to see these kind of a little bit larger, a little more life size or something like that. I think it might give it another dimension to it. Yeah, and then here's just a close-up installation shot of all the breaths together. So again, yeah, just a way to get people to be a little more mindful, a little more conscious of how unique each breath is and how different it is. And no two are ever going to be the same, even though it might feel like that sometimes. And so that's it about my work.
Great. So I'm going to have you and Norie kind of talk about what you guys talked about when you reviewed your work together. And maybe we could start out by sort of addressing like why you're interested in working in public art, and what motivates you with this sort of conversation about breath?
Yeah, because it just, sorry, should I start there? I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I just, from a mental health standpoint, the breath is the most important thing. Making sure you're aware of it at times can get you back in the moment and not worry about whatever ideas or thoughts are swirling around your head. So that's how it's helped me. And so I think if people see this in a public atmosphere, can even contribute to it, like I said, by kind of setting up and doing the work themselves, or doing some of the painting, or using their breath to make the colors show their breath. I think it could get people to kind of slow down, be a little mindful, and just realize, how unique this moment we're in is.
If I can just jump in here a little bit, I think that one of the things that is a bit of a challenge is how to make something so personal into a public artwork. And that even though breath is a very universal activity for all of us, I would really think that the idea of how that becomes a much like a forward, much more obvious, I guess, when one looks at these pieces, and also to think about how they might be organized or put into some kind of system, I guess, to be able to, so not everything is so random seeming. I think it loses a little bit of meaning when everything is sort of just like the color choices are all random, the breaths are all random, the installation, sort of the shape of them is random. You kind of lose a certain amount of a kind of targeted meaning or point of view about things. So I would encourage you to think about how maybe to organize these in a way that could be interesting, also with the kind of layer of data involved in it, as well as just the whole idea of every breath being different.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit during our review, which I appreciated. And my thought was possibly have like the attention for each breath, pose that as the task for the person doing. If I kind of set up in a community component of it, because so I'm sure the colors that fear represent for me aren't the same for you. And then we could just do like a whole bunch of ones that maybe show a certain emotion that might take up a space, or something like an airport. Maybe the thought, what is travel? What colors does that convey for you? What does the feeling of rushing convey? And maybe have that be a wall of what people think that color represents for that emotion. So that's kind of what I thought in terms of the data aspect of it.
Yeah, I just think that the more layers of information and meaning that you put in, people can enter in it in a lot of different ways.
Right.
And you want to allow people to spend some time with it. And I think that if there are these other layers of meaning, sometimes people will spend more time than just kind of going, oh, okay, got it, in a minute.
Right. Yeah.
And not paying attention to the individual aspects. I also liked what you were talking about, the possibility of making these into permanent materials, because obviously paper is a very fragile material, oil paint on paper. And that we talked a little bit about, using digital reproduction, or trying to figure out a way to use a substrate that's much more permanent with paint that's much more permanent. I know you've got your system down in terms of this particular medium, but you might think about how some other more durable information and paint might be used in a situation that is public.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, the oil paint to kind of thinner ratio has been the thing that's gotten me those ripples and stuff that kind of show me the impact the breath is having on the paint. But yeah, so it's been a search trying to see something else that might withstand some elements and be able to be a mural outside. But yeah, and then also the digital reproduction route would be a great way to go to kind of, and like we kind of talked about, blow them up and increase the scale of them.
Because I think they could be very beautiful, blown up, digitally reproduced, let's say in glass or something like that, to allow light to come through, as well as being opaque items.
Right.
And so I think a lot of the thinking about how to translate this idea, not just the idea of like individual pieces, but how the kind of collectiveness of them could be shown in that kind of format.
Right, exactly. Yeah, just a way to enhance the overall aesthetic of it. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that, oh,
Sorry, I was just gonna see if we talked a little bit about Ryan's statement, his artist statement when we looked at his work. Ryan, was there anything about the comments to your artist statement that you might want to talk about?
Yeah, when I wrote my statement first, it was just basically specific to the process and what it means to me. And there was no kind of talking about why a public space, why this space. So going forward, when I fill out applications and do artist space statements and stuff, I would definitely gear it around why does it need to be this space? Why not somewhere else? What could I bring to this space that would give the viewer a sense of any kind of feeling or emotion? So that's what I try to bring out when I craft my statements again is why this particular space and why now.
and especially why and how you might take these pieces and put them in different media to respond to the needs of the public space, I think are going to be really important for people to understand kind of how these would translate into their particular situation.
Right. Yep.
One of the things I think is also really interesting about how you approach this is that you really could involve the public in a way that is, very specific to that particular place. So, for instance, if you're working in I know you talked a little bit about airports, but let's say you're working in a space that has a much more targeted community. You can see where being able to involve people could be also really very interesting because it really allows people to kind of buy into your process and into the artwork as well. So,
Yeah.
They can point to like, oh, yes, I made that particular breath. That one's mine. And there's my, brothers and there's my friends. And I think that there's a certain amount of personal connection that could develop between, people within a more kind of closed targeted community as opposed to sort of a randomness. So I would really consider I appreciate randomness a lot on one level, but there's also a lot of intention in these pieces. And so I think kind of mediating between that randomness and intention is going to make it more interesting too.
Yes, certainly. The hope for me would be to just in like some hospitals or places like that. Because the breath is so important in those situations. If you're in some terrible pain or something, being mindful can help you, get a handle on it and get your mind around what's going on and stuff like that. So yeah, seeing breaths in a hospital to me would be pretty meaningful.
Another thought I just had was this idea of potentially layering. So you've got one person's breath like layered over another person's breath, that there's some kind of beauty there that could be interesting to
Certainly, that's a good idea.
Yeah. I think that in general, the artist statements that I've been reading for a lot of artists who are trying to make the transition between studio work and public artwork is that not just talking about what the work is that you're doing in the studio, but really thinking about how it can benefit from being out in the public and to be able to incorporate that in the statement as well, because I believe a lot in the idea of meaning and to express that and sort of what your meaning is about, but also about how that works in the public context, and to show that you're thinking about that in a deep way also is very helpful, I think, for panelists to understand how your work might translate into those specific projects.
Yeah, certainly. That's something I've never quite addressed before or thought about since we brought it up in the review. Is just why this space, why now, what is the viewer going to get out of this?
Right. So, and I think sometimes what's really difficult is that the there's such a limited number of words or sentences that you can put into a statement. And I even as an artist struggle with that as well. But learning how to be very concise about it and to incorporate all the various things that you need to in a short amount of space is kind of a challenge.
Yeah, definitely.
So one other thing that we talked about was sort of how to present Ryan's work, because when he's applying for a public art project. So we talked about beginning his presentation or in making sure to include some sort of installation type view of his work. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about that sort of decision?
Yes, I think that in presenting one's work, it's good to have this combination, especially with your work, of the installation possibility, the kind of bigger scenario where you put many things together, and a combination of that plus the individual pieces. I guess for me, I would limit the number of individual ones in favor of sort of how you see it, them coming together in some kind of grouping, and showing that possibility is good as well. So I know it's hard because you haven't had a lot of experience actually doing that, but to really think about that, because what people are looking for when they're looking at images is how your work is going to translate into their space. And sometimes just looking at the individual discs makes it hard for them to think about that. So it's good because then we get a sense of the character of the artwork and kind of the quality of the paint and the quality of how the breath moves that paint. I think you can see that in the individual pieces. But I think once you've seen two or three of those, you kind of get the idea of it. And then you'd like to sort of see how it in a bigger scenario.
Yeah, so that's kind of the thing is like I got caught up in the whole aesthetic surprise of what the work meant to me and stuff. And I obviously got obsessed with the process of using my breath because I made, thousands of these. So that really helped me take a step back and realize that, sure, one, we can get it after a few, but what's this going to look like in a space? Because it is hard to put together if you're just seeing all these random, circles and not understanding how they're going to come together. So that was a big eye opener for me.
Yeah, I think the challenge really is to move from the personal, because these are very, very intimate personal pieces, and for that to then have a greater meaning to the other people who are looking at it, who are not related to you necessarily. So I think there's that kind of moving outside of yourself that really needs to happen in a public context. And I'm glad to see that you're really thinking about how that would work. So that's good.
Yeah, certainly taking that macro view. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one other thing we also sort of touched on is like what type of public art projects Ryan should begin applying for. His work is very much studio based at this point, but if he wants to move into public art, like what sort of opportunities should he look for, and how should he target his applications to those?
Right. Well, I believe that you have to target your application to the specific context. And I think in starting, it's probably a lot of work to kind of make a huge, huge leap. So I would look at situations that are closer to what you are already doing. Interior pieces, maybe, this idea of reproducing digitally and putting them on a like two-dimensional surface rather than looking at three-dimensional opportunities, I think would be something you think about. I could see where eventually you might make them into individual pieces that, let's say, could hang in a space as opposed to just be on a wall. I could see that could be a possibility, but I would say initially I would target my search for opportunities to more two-dimensional spaces, just so you can get your skills together about all these other elements that are required in a public art project.
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, just to get, because, and then once I start the interior, I'm sure other ideas will come to me, like the hanging aspect. I never even considered that. That'd be a really good idea to possibly pursue in the future.
So we are like at about the time that we need to transition to our next presentation. I don't have any questions in the chat box at this point, but Norie and Ryan, is there anything else you want to say in closing out before we move on to Joseph's presentation?
Thank you guys for your time and feedback. It's invaluable. Thank you guys a lot.
Yeah, it's a pleasure seeing, that, and I'm looking forward to seeing what your first public art project will look like.
Thank you. Yeah, me too.
I do have a comment in the chat box, Ryan, that's specific to your work. Someone, actually, Doug Oland, who works with us at the Office of Arts and Culture, I don't think his video's on, or I'd ask him to wave and say hi. But he sees your work on maybe digital billboards or in some sort of science and technology collaborations, and maybe look for opportunities with like the Science Center, or like you said, hospitals, or some things that bring together science and technology in different ways. But yeah, now that I'm looking at this, it didn't occur to me before, but your work sort of lends itself to like an animation type concept as well, digital animation. But just some thoughts.
Yeah, great
Lots
idea. Thank you.
Yeah, lots of possibilities, so it's great.
Thanks.
Super. All right, Joe, you are with us now. Can you
Oh,
unmute
yes.
yourself? Great. All right,
Hello.
I'm going to move on to the next one. Just as a reminder to anyone joining us and watching these, you are welcome to type any questions into the chat box as we go through the presentations. So Joe, I'm going to have you take it away and we'll go through the slides of your work, and then you and Norie can chat about it.
Okay, thank you. I've always been intrigued with movement, and my pieces are all kinetic. They're all about movement. I try to create things that appear to have a life of their own and are not just sort of repetitive and mechanical. This piece is called "Can't You Sit Still and Stop Playing with Your Silverware?" It was a chair that belonged to a former girlfriend, and that's what she used to say to me, because I would be at the table and I'd be balancing the spoons and building things with the cups, and so she was throwing this chair out, and you can tell the base is the seat of the chair, and that curved piece is one of the back frame of the back, and then it's got those two sort of drumstick-like pieces that kind of tap out a rhythm. You can see a little bit of the motion in the photo. They're sort of going up and down, and people really seem to like the fact that the elements in this piece are recognizable. As you'll see, most of my work is basically just wood and some metal and hardware, but this is being something that's recognizable. People really seem to relate to it, and that was sort of an interesting observation for me. In fact, that came up in my conversation with Norie and the other folks the other day, that it was something recognizable. This piece is called Untitled Number One. It's one of my favorite pieces. It's about maybe 2 feet tall, and it has one block that you can see is attached to the motor via a little kind of flexible metal wire thing. And as it spins, it kind of starts hitting the pieces on the side, and then sometimes the one to the left of it also hits the one way over on the left. So it's a lot of really random kind of movement. This is probably one of the most successful in terms of being random. And like I said, it is one of my favorite pieces. It's called Untitled Number One. I made it so many years ago, and I just never have really, a name for it never has completely come to mind. So it just stayed untitled. All right, next. This piece is called Family Portrait. It's a wall piece. It's about 5 feet wide and 3 feet tall. I made it in memory of my mother, and it's about the family relationships. And when the motor is on, those discs kind of rotate back and forth, and then the bars, the wooden bars between the discs make other ones kind of rotate. Some are directly connected to the motor, and some are sort of second generation connected to the motor, called Family Portrait. Next. This piece is one of the few I've done that is not motorized, but it's, I guess, human powered. It's called Hedgehog, Motorless Hedgehog number 1. And it was a request by somebody, my current girlfriend. I wanted to make a piece for her birthday, and she requested a piece that was not motorized. And so it's the first one I had done, actually, that didn't have a motor, and I've done a few since. And the way it works is you pull the short rope that's kind of in the center, you pull that down, and it's got a weight on the other end of the rope that pulls it back. And as you pull it, those black wheels rotate. And the connecting rod on the right one that goes up to that bar kind of acts like a teeter-totter as the black wheel rotates. And as the teeter-totter goes up and down, it has these metal rods that are loosely connected via screw eyes to that bar. And so they go at the top of the piece, there's a piece of horizontal mesh, and they go through the horizontal mesh. So as that rod goes up and down, the pieces kind of rotate back and forth like that. Motorless Hedgehog number 1. That's about maybe 18 inches wide. This piece is called Dance of the Spiders, and it has a motor. It has this piece of 4x4 with a motor on top of it, and then coming off the top of the motor, and it's a very slow turning motor. It has this metal framework that has 3 sort of branches that go out horizontally, and each of these branches have some vertical elements that as it goes around, they sort of rotate back and forth very slowly, and just made me think of spiders. Actually, I'd mentioned this the other day in the meeting with Norie too, that I've noticed that there are several pieces that I've done now that have kind of spider imagery, and I had never realized I was so intrigued with spiders, but I guess I am. So it's called Dance of the Spiders. Oh, this one is sideways. So this is called Falling Through the Cracks, and that metal armature sticking up also has 3 horizontal branches sticking out to the sides. And it has these strings with different colored beads hanging from them. And that metal armature rotates slowly also. And the beads kind of drag through this wooden structure. And there are places where the beads kind of fall in between blocks and are picked up. And somebody had mentioned to me a while ago that she felt like she was kind of falling through the cracks when she was a kid. And I immediately had this image, so called Falling Through the Cracks. And that's also about 2 feet wide. The wooden base is about 2 feet wide. This is called Mi Buenos Aires Querido, and it's a piece I made in memory of my father. It's about 6 feet tall. And each of these black discs represent something else that was important to my father. There were, for some reason, a lot of things in his life that seemed to sort of conjure up wooden discs, like round shapes, round things, barbecue grills, bicycle tires. So I wanted to do something to remember him by, and that's this piece, Mi Buenos Aires Querido. My dad was from Argentina. Both of my parents were from Argentina, and the title is taken from a very famous tango by Carlos Gardel, who was probably the most famous tango singer in Argentina. And so that's Mi Buenos Aires Querido. Okay. This piece is called Red Stampede. It's about 2 feet wide also, and the imagery just reminded me of horses galloping. There's kind of an interesting derivation of this piece, you know, the way different pieces kind of come together, but I had the sort of T-shaped elements, the ones that swing. I had a bunch of those left over from something else, and I just had this image of making this piece, and So I used it for that. And one of the pieces actually had a little bit of red paint on it. And I thought, oh, I don't really feel like spending all this time to sand the red paint off. So I ended up painting the whole thing red to cover it. And I really like it. It's one of the few pieces I've done that actually has this much color on it. And I think the red really works well with this piece and with the motion. And this is one of the pieces I'd love to see large, because I think it would just, the motion large would just be really great. Anyway, and that's Red Stampede. This piece is called Wooden Tides. It's small. It's, I think, about, I forget, 8 or 10 inches on the side. Actually, this is a piece that I had done for the, at the ISC conferences. They have the, the member shows, and it's a piece I had done for that. And I really like the motion on it. And it kind of reminds me of the motion of the tides in the ocean, like kind of seaweed sort of moving around or something. So, and it has all these sticks that are about 8 inches tall, kind of rotating. So that's this one called Wooden Tides. This is actually the latest piece I've done. I'm working on a series of 12 by 12 wall pieces, motorized, well, mostly motorized. 1 or 2 will be human powered, but motorized wall pieces. My goal in this piece was I wanted to try to get some movement where the motor would wind up the rope and the disc wouldn't turn until it wound up a certain amount, and then it would just kind of go crazy spinning around. And I love the fact that it does that. That sort of rope tail gets caught on the cord or caught against the side of the wood, and it kind of winds up for a bit and then sort of really quickly spins around. I really like this one too. And it's called Spinning Dot. And it's, like I said, 12 inches on the side, and it's a wall piece. And is that it? I think that might be the end of the
That's it. That's the
images
last
and
one.
videos. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
So now what we're going to do is just sort of repeat a little bit of your conversation with Norie. Was there anything in particular that struck you about the conversation, something that you took away that was really important?
There were a couple things. One was, like most of my work is sort of abstract images that I'll just get an idea, like this spinning dot. I just wanted to see what would happen when the rope was wound up, and then if that wooden dot on the end would sort of wildly go around. Most of my work is based on that. Some of the pieces are based on things that have happened with people, with friends. Like, for example, the first one, the pink, Can't You Sit Still and Stop Playing With Your Silverware, that was based on an experience with somebody. And one of the things that Norie said was that in public art, a lot of times they like pieces that are based on something about the location, and like the story of the location. And so that was I hadn't realized that was a big realization, that the piece needs to somehow relate the particular place where it is. The other thing, and I mean, I kind of knew this already, but because most of my pieces are motorized, that's like a red flag right there, as Norie said, what they think is maintenance. And so that maybe there's more of a likelihood of doing large public pieces that are indoors, where there could be a motor and there wouldn't be, rain and other elements to cause problems with it. The other thing I'd like to do is experiment with wind-powered outdoor pieces, but there again, there's a lot of engineering and a lot of calculation about how the wind would power something. But I guess those were the two main things. I mean,
I think one of the things. Sorry.
I was just going to say one more quick thing, Norie. The other thing was the realization that, I could do this. You don't need a lot of experience in it. They look at your portfolio. They want to see the way you think, and it is a possibility. So that gave me a lot of hope, and I very much appreciate that.
Yes, I think, we're all looking at it going, oh my gosh, how is he going to be able to translate this into something that's much more durable and much more ability to kind of withstand being out in the public, inside or outside. There are similar challenges. And I think if you can kind of look at some of these as sketches or maquettes that could then be taken to, let's say, an engineer and a fabricator who could then put them, find the right kind of durability in materials and in motors or other kind of moving elements, with the right sort of ball bearings or whatever that allows it to withstand a lot of the kind of needs for the public. That would be a really good way of thinking about it. And so when you write about your work and about in the public statements that you might have to make about the work, I would definitely kind of say that these are, samples that you would be working with fabricators and engineers to be able to realize objects in the public realm. And I think it's really important to talk about that as well, because I think one of the challenges that studio artists always have in kind of transitioning to public is the idea of how you make works that are durable and at a scale that is really able to kind of function in the public realm. So thinking about that and how you would work with that is, I think, going to be critical. The other thing I wanted to just point out, which I just noticed when you were showing your work, is that when you present your work for public presentations, the orientation of your image, this is really a kind of very nerdy thing, but think of most projectors are done in a horizontal format. It just came up when you had your piece that was sideways, and I thought, oh, that would be something to think about, because a lot of images are shown because our monitors are horizontal. They show better in horizontal format than they do in vertical. And you just might think about that when you shoot your video, shoot your images, that kind of horizontal is, it shows up better.
Okay.
One thing that we talked about too was like the length of the video. When you submit
Yes.
videos to an application, first of all, check and make sure that videos are acceptable in the application you're applying for. Obviously, with the intent of your work, video is important, or like the motion is important. So if videos are available, yes, submit them, but keep them very short, because you want to think about the attention span of a panel. A panelist is possibly looking at over 100 applications, and each has 10 images and 10 or 10 videos. And so if each video is 10 seconds or 30 seconds, 10 seconds is about kind of the max of their time, their attention span to pay attention. So if you are using video in an application, I would say keep it as limited, as short as possible to make the point that you want to make about the work.
Right. I completely agree. And, we love to see our own work in video. We can look at it endlessly, but others can't, unfortunately. So I think we really have to think about that, because you don't want to make people irritated. That's one thing. And so I think it's important to really think about what the panelist is looking at. And the quality of the images is really important. And you do have really good quality images of your work. So I think that's initially that's a big plus.
Thank you.
In your work. But the photography level is critical.
Can I ask a question? If it's a competition I want to enter, and they don't have any provision for accepting videos, how would I show my work so they can get a sense of? I mean, is it just like on this one, the spinning dot? You can see a little bit of emotion in the tail. I mean, is that just is what it has to be? I guess.
I think that's just what it has to be.
Okay.
You
And
know, you can,
utilize any sort of description. Like if there's a place to describe what the work is about and what it's doing, use that sentence there. To keep it brief. The concept is so simple, and that is a good thing about it. Like it's complex in its simplicity. Um, and I would say that's use that opportunity to sort of explain, okay, this is why it's a spinning dot, and this is what it means, why the randomization is important. Um,
yeah, I think for you to, it's going to be kind of a challenge to make a very short description of what the piece is. So I think really thinking about how to describe the concept and the movement in a really short description is going to be something that you'll probably have to work on a little bit, because the explanation of how these pieces work, plus sort of what they're about, takes a lot, you know, and I think it's great for us to hear about it, but it's also good to be able to, when for the initial presentation, to be able to figure out how to do it in a really succinct way.
If I put if there was a video, say, on Vimeo or YouTube, and I put a link in the description, would they even bother looking at it? Or
I think if they're initially interested in it, they will look.
okay, thank you.
but careful with that too.
Yeah.
There are some applications that want you to be anonymous. So for
Uh-huh.
example, if you apply to the Office of Arts and Cultures calls, we need you to be anonymous. And if you link to a Vimeo that would identify you,
Okay, not good. Okay.
that actually would disqualify you from the application. So pay a close attention to what the restrictions are in the call before doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, this
Yeah,
is
I
great.
think-
This is
Yes, and I think you have a lot to think about in terms of how the particular piece that you would propose to design for a specific situation has a relationship to that particular situation.
right.
So that's something to also think about.
Right. Kind of like what I mentioned about the chair or the pieces based on stories of people I know. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so I
So
think we need to move on though.
we
So
do.
don't shortchange Heidi.
Thank you. Such great advice. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe. We'll come back to some questions. We do have some questions in the chat box about your work. We'll come back to those later, but I want to make sure we get to Heidi's presentation. So Heidi, if you could unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about your work.
Thank you. My name's Heidi Dauphin, and I've been working in public art, I think about 17 years. I moved to Phoenix in 2004, and soon after that, I became aware of public art. This piece is one of the first pieces that I did public art. I didn't even really know I was doing a public art piece. I was working with high school students. And I think this was around 2006. And I should say I finished my MFA in 2001, 20 years ago right now. And I did a whole thesis about thumbprints and identity. And so this piece was kind of a continuation of my thesis work, but then in a public realm with high school students. And so this is high school students' thumbprints. And I worked with maybe 3 or 4 ceramic classes, and then I installed it in a generic thumbprint form, and it's in the high school, and it's called Thumbprints in the Hundreds, and it's about 8 feet tall by maybe 5 feet wide. And this is the largest public art piece I did with a partner, Nina Solomon, who I met in Phoenix and started to do public art with. This is a wall made of poured in place concrete form liners. And so we designed, I think, 10 8-foot by 8-foot panels. And I think they tumble and turn in different relationships and patterns for 1,600 feet. And the design is based on cactus shadows and palo verdes, which you see in the foreground of the picture, those shadows. And this was an interesting process. I think I said yesterday when I had my review with Norie that this was my most profitable public art piece, but I never touched it. I never made something. And as a tactile artist, I still have feelings about this. I don't know where to go with that. I love the piece, but I do love making things within my artwork too, even when it's public art. Next, please. So this is a studio piece. It's called Times 40, and this gives you a little insight into my kind of studio practice, where my brain is at. I mean, it relates to the thumbprints in that it's all kinds of little parts. This is only about maybe 12 or 16 inches in diameter, but there's 40 of every object in there, arranged quite precisely and obsessively, possibly. Next. This is another piece, one of my favorite public art pieces. It's for the light rail in Phoenix, and I did this also with Nina Solomon. And this, we designed the wall, we designed the metal frames. It's actually quite dimensional. It starts low relief and comes out high relief. But then we made all the tiles. It's all handmade tile, which is what I've used a lot in public art. And I really like this piece because we put a lot of texture into tiles. We have like maybe 25 different colors of glazes that we flow and ebb between. And it's called City Flow. This is a piece I did myself for a yoga instructor, and it's his logo. I did not create the design, but he plays the gong, and he had this format of a sign, but it was a plastic decal on a piece of wood, and it was faded. And I knew his logo was about color, and it's actually the colors of the chakras. And so this piece I did for him, and it's my little spiel sometimes when I talk about public art, and that I do a lot of handmade ceramic tile for public art, and that it will not fade. And people think it's very hot in Phoenix, which it is, but the tiles I fire to 2200 degrees, and they will not melt, and they will not fade even in the heat of the summer. So anyways, this is about 5 years old, and it's still as bright as it was the first day, and it's double-sided, and it hangs there. This was a private commission for a family, and it combined a lot of ideas. I really liked working on an indoor piece. I know we're talking about public art, but this is based on a quilt design that I've used a lot in it. It's a quilt that hangs in my house. And then it combined the textures from the light rail piece, because she actually saw that piece and wanted something for her house along those textures. And then it also combines the thumbprints from my grad days. That this is a family, they have 5 kids, so it's a family of 7. And each panel includes a tile with the family's thumbprints. They came to my studio, and we made tile, and they pressed their thumbprints in the tiles. So it's called family quilt. Yes. And she calls it her family self-portrait, because she can't get all her kids together to take a picture. So this hangs in their house. Next. This is another studio piece. It's kind of my ideas that it's pencils. I think there's over 900. I manipulate and play with things and think of patterns and how pieces come together. It actually is a quilt pattern, but it didn't start out being that way. It became the pattern based on the object. And I often play with things like that in my studio, is how can an object be repeated and then made into a pattern that's interesting into a large design. And it's called Making a Point. This piece is another studio piece, quite large. The pencil piece was about 2 feet by 2 feet. This is actually sitting right behind me. I think it's about 3 feet by 3 feet. It's called 10 by 10 by 10 equals 1,000. And there's 100 squares in it, and each square contains 10 objects, and they're all arranged in an order that no square contains the same amount of objects, and no object is in the same place ever in the piece. And there's 1,000 objects total. And then I think I have another, this is the last large public art piece I did. It's the entranceway to a retirement facility, and it's called Solterra Sons. And there's 2 panels there. and they're about 5 foot by 6 foot each. And it just a little note on the designing of this piece was that it is handmade ceramic tile. Well, before I move to the next slide, the one you see in the foreground, oh, can you go back? The one you see in the foreground is a metal panel that's been powder coated in kind of like a rust color. But initially they wanted tile on both sides of both of these panels. So 4 panels of tile, and the image was going to get so small based on their budget. And I said, why don't we leave the 2 backsides blank? Because you're going to have trees growing there anyways, and you want the entranceway to be showcased with the art. And so that's how the idea of the holes through the design became, because they're initially, so if you move to the next one, that's the sky. But initially the design was a solid panel of tiles, but the holes created some interest from the backside where the trees were going to be. So it wasn't a solid metal plate holding the tile. And I really like the holes, but they fabrication wise, they were hard. So I did work with a metal fabricator, and he made the frame that I designed. And then I filled both frames with tile and then had it installed. And I think that's it.
Great. Thank you so much. Why don't you guys just jump right into some of the things that you learned from your conversation?
Okay. Do you want to start, Norie?
I could. I think one of the things we talked about is the order in which you put your images when you do your presentations. And I think I was just noticing how I'm enjoying the relationship between yours and Ryan's work of the many pieces make one big piece idea, and that ability to kind of use a community process. So I think that for public art purposes, that it would be really good to start out with a public art image, just because it would then show sort of how you would think about your work in, the bigger context. I enjoy the smaller studio work, and so I think it would be good to include those as well. But at least in terms of the initial image, it's probably good to start out with one that shows sort of that you have this experience of working in public art as well. I love that pencil piece, by the way. So I think that's a really wonderful way of showing pattern and sort of your skill at putting together smaller pieces into a bigger pattern. And that's really also very dynamic connection to quilts and different materials. So that's also a good artwork to include.
Okay, thank you.
One thing about the order I just wanted to bring back up, Norie, you told Heidi yesterday that, yes, start with a public art piece as your first image, but pick the project that's closest to something that you're applying for. So you're actually going to reorder your slides every single time. I think, Heidi, you mentioned that you normally just put them in chronological order. So I thought that was a really good technical point. Like,
yeah,
it's okay to reorder them each time.
Yes, and you should, because I think the more specific you are to the opportunity, the better chance you would have. And so if it's an indoor opportunity, then start out with an indoor piece rather than an outdoor piece necessarily, and vice versa. Just because of the, I think the more specific you are, the better. So I tend to change around every application I submit is different one from the other. It has different artist statements and different, I emphasize certain aspects of my work. So it's not always the same, and I don't show the same work.
So. You talked about starting with the piece that maybe relates to the call the most, but do you also think it's important to end with a strong piece?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you want to grab people initially, like, wow, that's interesting. And also you want to remind people at the end that it's still
Mhm.
interesting, so I think that kind of, it's theater in a way. I don't
Yeah.
think we think
Yeah.
about it that way, that we think about our presentations in that way, or it's like a film, or, we really want to grab people, and then we want to make sure that their interest doesn't wane. So I think that it's good to be very intentional about what one includes in the applications.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
One thing I wanted to say that I really took from our talk earlier was that you pushed me to include more meaning behind my pieces. And hearing the other two artists talk, I feel like a dual artist in a sense that my studio work is one thing and my public art is another. And I kind of entered public art as a ceramic artist that could make this handmade tile, but I would really like to mesh some of my ideas in the studio with specific calls. I think that's my next goal. And I talked with you about that, and that helped a lot.
yeah, I think meaning is one of the most important things that one can put into public art. It's not just about making something that looks good.
Mhm.
We're really trying to make meaning, have a place that has meaning, because that's what really grabs people about places. It's about memory, it's about a connection. And I think something that just looks good is fine in some situations, but for me, I need something more. And that's just sort of how I approach it, and I'm sure other artists do it differently. So, I can only tell you from my point of view what I think is really important, but meaning is important. And,
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree totally. I just think that somehow I entered public art. I'm listening to Joe and Ryan, and I think they're trying to enter public art from their studio experience. And I think I entered public art just from my ability to make handmade tile, maybe. I don't know. It makes sense. I mean, in grad school, I was a ceramic major, but it very much shifted to mixed media in this object collection. So that's kind of where my aesthetic, my mind, my art mind is at.
yeah, and I think we talked about your statement, including a little bit more about that, as opposed to just your technical ability. Because at a certain point, I like to assume that technical ability is a given, that yes, you're able to do the work technically, whether you do it yourself or hire a fabricator or combination of things, but that the meaning is what you as an artist are really putting into the artwork. And I think that is why it's so important to kind of think about that. What's the work about?
I think that's one thing that kind of carries through all three of the artists today. Everything has these like personal meanings and stories that shed so much light onto the work. If you're just looking at the image on its own, you might not get it. So the statement is so important, or the caption on the photo is so important to really share the meaning rather than your experience in making tile, because I could see the experience in making tile. So it's like I think it was Nicole, or maybe it was somebody on the call yesterday, said your statements and your words need to complement your images, but not repeat what your images are saying. I thought that was a really good point. Yeah, someone put in the chat box about Joseph's work. I really enjoy hearing about the emotional connection to the movement. I enjoy hearing about the emotional connection to each individual thumbprint or each individual breath. I think that is kind of the unifying factor between three very different artists, very different sort of experience levels within public art or studio art. But that's the kind of one thing that ties the three of you guys together.
Yeah, it's interesting because initially I didn't really think about that when I was just looking individually at the work. But when I see it now as a group, you can really see that kind of connection of the many parts the parts become very important to create the whole. And there is a sort of emotional, personal connection that then grows out from us as, you know, single people to kind of the more group experience, which is what a public art experience is about.
Well, and we talked about the word count or the character count of the statements. Like it is limited in these applications. You might have 250 words or 1,000 characters to describe it. So you have to think, okay, it's limited because your panel has a limited attention span. How are you going to make it the most influential? And I think that's sort of something that I garnered from the conversation is like, talk about first the meaning of the work, then your experience, then, or no, meaning, then process of how you make work, then experience. Because we could see your experience in the images itself, but the meaning and the process, that's how panels are going to know how you think. And that's what they're going to select you based on. Do you have the potential to think about my project the same way that you think about your project and make it happen?
Right. And if you don't have a lot of experience that you can show through your images, then I think it's important to talk about it in the statement, just to give people confidence that you can deliver at that level. But I do think that the whole idea of taking information between the image descriptions and the statement and the bio, to try to make sure that those you maximize the information that you present and not repeat every time everything
Right.
in that.
I have a question that actually didn't come up yesterday, and it relates to, I think I submitted 9 or 10 images, but I felt like it was more important in this, and I find myself thinking this way a lot when I apply to things. I have a certain amount of images. Should I show as many different pieces as possible? Or with almost all of my pieces, I like to show details, even if it's a studio piece or a public art piece. So do you have any opinions about, like, if I have 10, should I just show 5 different works in a detail of each, or should I show 10 works with no details?
That's a really hard question to answer. I think it really depends.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's better to show things that are more related than a bunch of unrelated pieces. But I don't really know what to tell you about that. I do know that as a panelist, sometimes you look at the images submitted and you just think, you know, was it a bunch of different artists who made this? I know that happens to me in my work because my work looks really different one from the other. And so one could say, God, she's just all over the map, you know, and I don't know what we're going to get. Or it could be a situation where, like, wow, she does so much different, you know, a variety of things that it's really exciting to see what will happen, you know. So there are 2 different ways to look at it. And I think you kind of think about what the opportunity is, and is it a narrowly focused opportunity? Then focus the images. So let's say the opportunity is a wall. Then you don't want to show a bunch of things that are sculpture, probably.
Yeah.
I think it would be good then to kind of focus on the pieces that are relevant, even if they're studio pieces, and think about that. Or if it's a sculptural piece, you know, you don't want to show a bunch of paintings. I think you want to show how what you do could be sculptural.
Right.
So we are coming to the end of our time, and I want to make sure that we close out with some resources, because that was one thing we talked about yesterday with Heidi and with Joe and with Ryan too, how to apply for things and where to look. When you're beginning to move into public art, start sort of on a more local level, look at the programs that are around you. If you're sort of at a position where Heidi is and you want to go for more sort of national calls, these are resources that are really helpful. locations, the International Sculpture Center, the ISC has a great list of current open applications. And then Cafe Submittable and publicartists.org, those are all places where you actually put in the applications. So it's not just a list. Those are actual application sites. The City of Phoenix always uses Cafe for their calls to artists. And then Public Art Exchange is a new professional network for artists, administrators in public art. This website started about 2 weeks ago, and people from all over the country are already posting their opportunities there for artists to apply for. It's free to join, so I recommend that you check it out. I think one thing that Norie said to Heidi yesterday about making a proposal for work. You said something, Norie, about like doing something you've never done before, but something that you want to do, something that you're interested in. I thought that was a really cool point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
To look
like
at
that.
each opportunity not as a way to do something that you've already done, but to, allow yourself to grow and to move into a different scenario or a challenge of some sort in a way that you haven't done before. It's a way to keep interested and not get stale, and also a way to develop into a direction that you might be interested in going into. But let's say, for instance, water. You want to incorporate water in your work in some way. Instead of like going full bore into a water piece, you might want to start with adding water in a small way into your work, so that then you gain a certain amount of experience before you can, you go into a huge water piece. So I think it's good to kind of think about that. And if you want to work in glass, will this be a good opportunity for you to expand into that? If you want to work in bronze, is this another opportunity for you to be able to work in bronze that you hadn't had before? So think about what you want, and kind of moving yourself as an artist forward.
Yeah, that's important advice.
There's one other resource that I wanted to mention. I popped a link into the chat box to share with everyone. The Office of Arts and Culture also has a YouTube page where we have a series of workshops, professional development workshops for artists. And one series is called Public Art 101, and it goes from how to apply to a project to how to do a proposal to how to navigate through the contracting process to what to do when you get hired and you're working with engineers and architects. It's a good overview. It's 4 1-hour sessions. And we also have tons of other workshops that we've been working on throughout the year. They're all posted on our YouTube channel. I put a link in the chat box. You can also find it on our website. We are at 11:15, so I'm going to ask Ed to close us out. If you have further questions, please send us a message. You can find us here at these websites, the ISC and Phoenix. Thank you so much. Ed, can you close us out with a goodbye?
I can do a song and dance on the way out.
Great.
Norie Sato, thanks so much for jumping in on this and offering such guidance and I think wisdom for each one of the artists. Ryan and Joseph and Heidi, thank you for your bravery in sharing your work with us, and also being willing to talk about it and the kind of detail that you have. Obviously, I want to thank the International Sculpture Center. Jeanette Darr and Nicole Lambeau have worked closely with Katie Byaris in our office to make these workshops happen. And I think, as Katie and everyone has touched on, there are more to come. We have 2 more. One is July 22nd, and then another on July 29th. Same time, same bat station. And you can certainly find those workshops on our website and also at the ISC, but just go to www.phoenix.gov/arts and look for the workshops page. I also wanted to point out, one other thing that's been touched on, as Katie mentioned, we have an opportunities page. Go to our website and look for public art opportunities. We have a call that's open right now, and it's largely for two-dimensional artists or artists specializing in two-dimensional work to design shade screens for standard city bus shelters. So if that interests you, by all means apply. That's open for the next month or so. And then I would encourage everyone who is not already on our email list to certainly join that, and you can find that link on our website as well. Just a couple additional thoughts. There was a question going out the door here from Heidi, I think, on how should you structure your presentation? What kinds of slides? And I think everything, particularly from a panel standpoint, having witnessed dozens, if not hundreds of them, begins with the visuals. And so each one of your image really needs to have a purpose in bolstering your case and story. And I say that because, panels, the images go by panels pretty quickly. And so you want, as Norie pointed out, to be able to grab them and keep their interest. One of the central questions of today, and perhaps all of these sessions, is what makes meaning in our work? And the work we do makes a leap and has to make a leap, as Norie pointed out, beyond our personal intentions and those explanations we carry around in our heads. And so does the story we carry around in our heads to explain what we do really convey or matter to the tens of thousands or maybe even millions of people who might see our work in public? And I put that question out there because the reality is that works of art, particularly visual, musical, nonverbal works and others, already speak a kind of language they were meant to speak. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing it. You'd be working in some other medium, maybe words. So what do your words and explanations really add to the experience of your visual work and the material idea? And I'll leave you with this, is that the best works, I think, for all of us really demand a kind of leap through experience to meaning, both by the maker and by the audience. And think about that as we all experience new works in public, but also as you make new work in your studios. And please join us again next week and the week after for this ongoing series of workshops. And with that, thank you one and all for sharing this time with us. It's been a great privilege to see you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording.
Oh, good. That would be good.
Thank
I
you,
just
Norie.
wanted